So I'm going to get into this. As for going back to the sort of like use the correct, use the appropriate yardstick to judge the effects of the different cognitive functions. One thing that I think is kind of mistaken about judging FI behaviors and attitudes according to FE ways of doing things and seeing things is, it's missing the point. As I said in the title of the video, apples to oranges. It's doing a disservice, I think, on many levels. And I'm not just saying it's just being mean to, FI people. It's doing a real disservice to an enlightened understanding of human relations. And so I would think, for example, if I'm going to try and show what FI is all about, if I were to try to show here's what I think about FI. Okay, this is, again, there's so many things to say about it, but I'll throw a couple of ideas out there. I would agree that FE associated behaviors are what, I should think about this some more, but, I do tend to agree with heavy FE users and supporters, you could say, that what you want in a group most of the time are people behaving as the FE people, heavy FE users, behaving as they do quite naturally. Like what comes naturally to them is how you want everybody behaving a lot of the time in a group. You want harmony. You want there to be easy consideration of everybody else. You don't want somebody who's, a tall poppy, as they would say in Sweden. You want someone who's very aware of the group and the needs of the group, as well as the individual, I would say. And the thing is, the group is made up of individuals, so that's one way of looking at it too. As the group's made up of individuals, so you need to respect the individual to have a group that is worth something. That's a very FI thing to say. So I don't expect everybody to agree with that, but that's kind of where we're coming from, and that's why we will insist sometimes on looking at the exception to the rule, or we'll fight for having that be considered by the group, because we feel that it's very important that certain exceptions be made sometimes. So to protocol or politesse or whatever. So that brings me to a question that I use when I'm trying to help people discern for themselves whether they are more inclined to use FE associated decision-making processes, or whether they're more inclined to use introverted feeling ones. I'll put forth the following scenario. It is this. Let's say you are at, I don't know, let's say it's some public event, like a public meeting, or a lecture or a class, or maybe it's at a party. Just some group where there's a group of people all together, people who are presumed to have something in common, maybe just loosely or maybe rather intimately. And let's say you are in a group, a small group, I don't know, maybe 8 people, something like that. And all of a sudden, somebody in that group that you don't know that well, there are people in this group you don't know that well, you're not on intimate terms with them, somehow the conversation turns to a subject that's kind of dear to your heart. And a good number of people in that group, let's say at least half the group, the majority of the group, gets into a conversational line in which they are trashing a value of yours, something that you feel is it's very dear to you for some reason. You feel or that you feel on an intellectual level too is extremely important. Let's say that value is getting trashed. What I would ask then is to consider that it will be a given that whichever of these two sort of general courses of action you might take to sort of deal with this situation, this group situation, either choice is going to be, if you're someone who is a feeler, for example, you've got feeling high up in the cognitive stack, you are going to feel, particularly if you're of the NF temperament, the idealist temperament, where idealism is you live and breathe it all, whether you like it or not, you're living and breathing it all the time. You're grappling with questions related all the time. So I guess this differentiating question pertains to people of that group particularly, but perhaps others can relate as well. So let's say this value that you have is being trashed, and there are sort of two different ways you could go about sort of supporting that value, showing support for that value. And I would ask people, what would you be more likely to do in such a situation, which would be stressful to any idealistic person. It would be very unpleasant, stressful. Your cortisol would be flowing through your veins. Your heart would be beating really fast. Your palms would be sweaty. You'd be feeling very nervous. You would not be feeling good in such a situation if you're an idealist, and you're faced with a value being trashed, and you have to do something about it. So that's a given. Either course you take, it's not going to be fun. Whichever way you go, it's not going to be fun. So what would you probably do 51 times out of 100? What would feel more like you to do? Would it be to vocally and very directly stand up for that value and let your opposition to where the conversation's going and the points of view being promulgated against this value, would you feel compelled to, even though nerves be damned, you feel like you're going to be sick right into your purse, or you feel like you the fight or flight adrenal response is going, you are not having a good time, but would you probably 51 times out of 100 in such a situation feel like you had to say something, that you had to quite blatantly stand up for that value in the group and say, I don't agree with this? Knowing that there are people in the group who are not going to like that. They will not be put at ease by your saying that. They will find it unpleasant. They might even find it rude. They might even find it very rude. They might even decide never to talk to you again. But do you feel like you would, you're aware of all that and you care about that and you don't want those negative outcomes, but at the same time, you feel compelled to say something and to speak up in the moment? Or would you feel like it would be more you to go about defending this value, this cherished value, in another way? Perhaps it would cross your mind to speak up directly and express your disagreement with the trashing of this value, or to speak, passionately in favor of the opposite of what's being discussed, the way the thing's being discussed. But ultimately you might think, well, I just don't want to do it. I can think of good reasons not to. I feel like I probably won't be able to convince these people anyway. Whatever. You may go through all these different thought processes to arrive at a course of action, which is maybe to, definitely shy away from joining in and trouncing that value. You're not going to go against your values by being quiet, but you're probably going to choose to be mostly quiet, or maybe to, gently say something very, very oblique and indirect, like, that might hopefully, in hopes that it might kind of turn the tide of the conversation a little towards, being in favor of that value or supportive of it somehow. Or do you just opt to keep the peace, but you sort of think to yourself, I'm going to do something you're bothered by this value being trashed and you want to do something in support of it, but you elect to do something that's more indirect in support of it. And I would say, for example, that could be, you decide to talk to, later to in a different setting where it won't be so tense and disruptive. Maybe you'll try and talk to a couple of people who are in that group about that value and try and promote it, in a different context, in a gentler way at a different time, or maybe you might write a letter to the editor about, such and such an issue, or maybe you would support with your efforts or your money or whatever you're talking up, sort of activist or charitable support of that value later, just to do something that's more indirect and that is more harmony promoting while also still honoring that value. Which would you be more likely to do? I would characterize the sort of first course as being FI related, and the second one as being more FE related. And I think that's a pretty telling situation to sort of discern where, which cognitive function you're using, or using much more and with much greater ease and effectiveness. And I think that brings us quite nicely to the thing is, again, you don't want FI. This is how I see it. And again, some people might get really mad at this. I don't know. Maybe it's, I need to think this through some more, or it's silly. I don't know. But I think there's something to this. I think of FI as an FI user too. I think of it as something that, again, you don't want FI running normal everyday situations all the time. You don't want it. How do I put it? You don't want it in charge. You don't want it to be the one, that's setting the tone for everything all the time. I think actually FE in sort of regular, everyday, peacetime. There's no big crisis, no big fire that needs to be put out. The FE, the way of doing things that comes naturally to the FE users is the way that is probably best for things to run. But here's the thing, FI, introverted feeling, is a function, it's effects. It's something that kind of like a person that, this, everyone, we all have these people in our lives, and some of us have nothing but these people in our lives. But like people who are kind of like itching for a fight, like there's certain people, they've got the reflex, they're ready to go, they've got this sort of ability to fight, maybe I think we can all agree that a healthy functioning society is not one where the majority is like itching to fight, ready to like smash a table with a chair or freak out or whatever, yell or be disruptive, be really unpleasant. However, what you also don't want in a healthy functioning society is a big group of people where no one is willing to break the peace, no one is willing to be unpleasant, no one is willing to ever do anything that might be inharmonious or might put someone not completely at ease in the group. And again, think of certain fascist state situations where, if there's something that's going on in a group that is evil and should not be going on and is not good ultimately for that society, you better hope there's an FI user around or someone who's willing to behave like one, because there are certain times in a healthy functioning society where, like, in other words, you need those people, those fighters, those unpleasant people who are willing to disrupt or feel compelled to disrupt the peace. You need those people at the head of a phalanx of social change, of progressive change in a society, for example. You can't have everybody just doing the FE shtick. Because if you do, there's certain things that there's certain sort of conventions that need to be breached in a very unpleasant way and quite a dramatic way. And then what tends to happen with political change is that there's this whole phalanx of other people who are much more just easier to deal with, or much more diplomatic and are playing their sort of part in a social change movement, for example. And the majority that get the shit done, that get reform accomplished, are people who are using much more diplomatic means and often much slower and more interconnected and more cooperative to make change, institutional reform, for example. But the fact remains that you need some people to bust some shit up at the beginning. You do. That nothing that's been difficult to change and reform in society has ever happened because people were all very polite and always made sure that everybody liked what was happening and everybody was comfortable and whatever. Like, that's not how actual major change that needs to happen in a society. That is never how it happens, ever, 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 ever. Which is not to say that, you need violence and you need things to be awful and you need, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, though, that the radicals, the people who are the heavy FI users in many cases, whether they want to or not, they feel compelled to stand up and be disruptive and to say things that people don't want to hear. And it's not fun to hear, not fun to be around, and make scenes and so on in an organized way or in a not so organized way. They have their roles to play in society, and it's absolutely essential that they be there. The other thing about FI, too, and I'm going to post a link that I think really exemplifies this in the description box below. For those who think that FI is just a terrible thing, basically, its expression is pretty crappy and annoying, and just we'd all be better off without it. Here's another thing to consider. If you take FI individualism and sort of deeply felt sense of self and the kind of willingness to rebel it comes naturally to rebel when, and again, remember, it's not all the time, but when a value is being threatened, cherished value is being threatened, If you want to take that out, you're also taking out, you're just taking a whole bunch of people who are very disproportionately contributing to the making of art, for example. So like if you like music, if you like, again, it's a pretty crude way of putting it, but if you care about music, if you enjoy music and you enjoy art, well, a hugely disproportionate number of the people in the world who are making those things are heavy FI users. They are the ISFPs, they are the INFPs, and they're really in there. So if you want to take out like what is their dominant function, their driving function, and get rid of it, you're going to be all of the cog functions in any given type, they're all interacting in a very complex kind of nexus. And if you like sort of, FI atomize them and take that out, well, bye-bye, just remove like half of all of the greatest works of art and music that have ever been produced. Just get rid of them, because that's where that stuff comes from. Importantly, again, not to say they're the only ones that, of course, that they're the only ones that do that, or that it's not a billion times more complicated than that. It is, but that's my thesis here, is just a little more respect for a little more understanding. It's a plea for a little more understanding and a little more, and yes, in some cases, a little more respect for FI than it gets a lot of bad PR sometimes. So I'm going to put in the link, I'm just about done, but I'm going to put in the link below what I think is a pretty terrific example of where FI can shine. So again, I'd like to see FI not being posited as a failure of extroverted feeling in its ways. I would like to see it in what I think is its proper context, which is it should be when it's at its best. It's again, you don't want to see it every day. When it's at its best, FI is very heroic. That's what it is. It's and what that means too is it's not for its best is not for the everyday. You don't want, again, a healthy functioning society is not a bunch of charging, grandstanding heroes all day long. That is not what you want most of the time. But the thing is, there is a time and a place for it where it is invaluable and essential to the healthy functioning of that society, of that group. And where that is often in entertainment. It's wherever somebody who's very prominent in the situation, such as a performer, who's running things in a sense, that's where FI really, really shines. Or when you need people leading the charge for a cherished value in order to reform society, that's where you need FI, absolutely, and where it shines and where it's doing its thing in a very, very positive way. Maybe not always pleasant, but essential. You also would see it too in terms of self-development and sort of more like on the more not individualistic level. Well, yeah, on the individualistic level, in healing and in self-help stuff and in sort of human development activities, FI has its place there too. Again, you wouldn't want just FE or just FI. Having just either one would be a bloody disaster. Each has its own parts to play that are essential. And again, you don't necessarily want FI and its strong individualism and its rawness expressing itself all of the time. But